The wooden hull creaked gently beneath him, a low rhythm echoing with the small waves tapping at the sides. He closed his eyes. The boat rocked. Inhale. It rocked again. Exhale. It had been hours since he adjusted course, touched the oars, or scanned the horizon. And yet, here he was, still moving, still breathing. Funny, he thought, how easy it is to forget that breathing is happening all the time. That staying alive doesn't always require doing. That sometimes the only proof of progress is the inhale that follows the exhale. The traveler let one hand trail in the water. Some fish darted by, slick, silver, shimmering green, pulsing in unison beneath the surface, breathing underwater. How weird is that? Some believe we used to be just like that, water breathers, ocean creatures. It made him laugh. We've come so far, and yet here he was again, surrounded by water, in a boat, breathing through it. The rhythm returned. Wood, water, wind, breath. A slow internal drumbeat syncing him with something older than language, maybe even older than land. Maybe this was the whole point. He was alive, breathing, and somehow that was enough. This is So What, Who Cares with Laura McCarville and me, Jeff Kolaski. Join us as we explore practical insights for an impractical mind. So if you are listening to our show, if you're a fan of our show, if you like what we're putting out, it would mean a lot to us if you shared it, whether to your social media or just send it to some of your friends or something like that. If you have the time, we'd love to have a rating or a review. Or if you have some suggestions for us, you can email us. Our email address is in the show notes. So check that out. It means a lot to us. We'd love to see who's listening and what you like, what you maybe don't like. Not that we'll change anything because you don't like it, but you know.
It's curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So welcome to the show. Welcome to the basement, Laura.
Thank you.
My studio instead of your studio this time. Thank you for being willing to come and hang out here.
Easy. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so today we're talking about breath, breathing, right? You, mostly, we in conversation, but you have talked about bringing everything back to the body, right? To one of the most direct ways to our body and to our mind is through breath. Am I wrong?
Yeah, it can. It can be. Yeah. It is what we're taught and queued up to be doing. I mean, and it's autonomic, so it's happening.
It's happening regardless.
Right.
In most circles, when you talk about things like mindfulness, or you talk about things like being in the moment, or you talk about just mental health in general, or the nervous system, it seems like one of the first things that is suggested is breathing, breath, deep breaths or whatever. And I know that can be problematic because we've talked about that. Yeah. It's not always just take a deep breath, because what if I can't do that? What if I have some sort of a condition where that doesn't work for me? So there's more to it than that, which is what I would love to dig into with you today. We have like 7,000 points of topic here, or points that we could talk about today. So we're going to pick through some of them and just see where the conversation goes.
Cool.
So let's talk about breath.
Okay.
Not in just the take a deep breath, like we said, but the real stuff, right? Why does breath matter so much in what we do and what you do for your job, in our daily life? I mean, obviously, if you break down the science of it, we got to breathe, right? You said it's autonomous, so we got to breathe in order to continue
Autonomic,
living.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's
autonomic,
happening.
yeah.
It's happening just like your heart's beating.
Right.
You don't have to tell yourself to breathe. And that's really cool in the way of which the okay, let me back up.
Mm-hmm.
So, having been a yoga teacher for over 20 years, breathing is like a big deal in yoga. So outside of our culture as a whole, pranayama has been present as an access to spirit. In fact, pranayama isn't even taught to it's taught, but asana is access to pranayama, meaning like we use our body and then through movement, then we access pranayama. But
And can I stop real quick because I'm not
yeah.
familiar with the terminology.
Oh, sure. So pranayama would be for just the most like laid out thing. It's just the practice of breathing.
Okay.
In through the yoga lens.
Okay.
So there's some yoga breathing things, um, techniques or that I learned as a student and teacher and have taught. Um, and they're beautiful. And we do learn that in yoga. And that would be more of like, if we look at this conversation, like biomechanical, like how you breathe, right? So breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth, you might have a different breathing exercise.
Right.
Short breaths, fast breaths. This is all done in that context. Way before yoga, take a deep breath was really popularized in the last maybe even 10 or 15 years. I feel like it's mainstream. Everyone's just even just like off the cuff. Oh, you just need to take a deep breath, right? And it's like, no, I'm really just expressing myself.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, you need to take a breather, take a breather. It's like become synonymous with calming down, which what we find. So I step out of the yoga studio and I go into practicing with kids and adults, and I go into different environments, and I found very quickly that breathing is not an access to being calm.
Okay.
So that's when I went from going, okay, well, I understand the biomechanical, meaning like using my diaphragm and breathing in and accessing like capacity. And, this is how you breathe in through the nose and breathe out through the nose.
Right.
But when I started to see that it was actually triggering some trauma responses or asthmatic responses, or some people weren't able to access their breath, I went, oh man, I do not know enough. And so I went down a different path of studying breath through the Buteyko method. And that focuses more on like biochemical, like what happens when we breathe in, where is the carbon dioxide, what happens in that way, which has become a huge thing through a book that James Nestor wrote called Breath. So
to try to keep it as, we have do a 30 to 40-minute show. So to try to keep it somewhat, concise here, what is it about breath that helps us in these ways? Because you're mentioning breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth. I'm under the impression that if I'm taking a lot of short breaths and not getting a deep breath, that's not necessarily good, because there is something to do with oxygen and, oxygenating your blood and, what goes into your brain and all that. What about it is, why are those specific things so helpful in what you're teaching, what we're doing in life?
Okay. So if I were to just generalize breathing in general, if I said in general, everyone would be better off nasal breathing, meaning breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. I would say the acronym of LSD, light, soft, deep. So and I know a lot of people listen and don't watch, but if you could imagine if I were to take a deep breath, what happens, and you can watch and go like, I took a really big breath and it's all in my upper chest cavity, and I'm using all of these upper muscles. So I'm actually creating stress.
Oh, there's pressure.
Right. Like, so if we practice in non-triggering stressful moments to breathe in through the nose and out through the nose.
Oh, in through nose, out through nose. Same.
Yeah. In through the nose and out through the nose.
Okay.
So light, soft, deep. So it's actually almost like you're taking in a little bit less air
Mm.
because it's not as much about oxygen because you breathe it in and breathe it out. It's more about carbon dioxide and carbon
Hmm.
dioxide tolerance. But we don't really need to get into that piece. What I would say is most people just learning how to breathe in through the nose and out through the
Mm.
nose. Now, there are times where we practice breathing out through the mouth um, as like a conscious effort of an exhale, like a
Hmm.
to
Right.
relax. So if I'm breathing in slow and out long to cue yourself into a different state,
Mm.
so it'd be like in slow and out long.
What's the difference between a slow breath and a long breath?
Well, depends what you have capacity for.
Okay.
So if you're breath training, you might take 3 breaths, meaning an inhale, exhale in 1 minute.
Hmm.
If you're practicing breath training. So it's really relative to the person breathing. With that being said, I think with all of the focus on breathing when it comes to meditation, mindfulness, regulation, what we've gotten is a lot of people who are obsessing with doing it right,
Mm.
getting it right, which is creating more of the stress
Hmm.
and not really actually getting the thing done in which the intention was with
Right.
learning breath. So I would, and I always now cue when teaching breath is observe it and know that you're doing it well enough because you're alive
Right.
and let it be a
You're still
reminder.
alive, so you're obviously doing something right
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
So let your breath instead be a reminder that you're enough,
Yeah.
that how you're breathing is enough. And we know that because you're not passed out.
Right. And does how someone breathes actually say something about how they're doing emotionally?
I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
it does. And it's which came first. So if we're looking at like, okay, there's airway restriction,
Hmm.
then how are they doing? Well, there's probably consequences to airway restriction, right?
Hmm.
You see people with CPAPs, and
Hmm.
so meaning something's going on in nose,
Right.
something's going on in throat, there's something happening with lungs. So yeah, how they're breathing does give indication
Okay.
to how they're doing
Right.
physically.
I
And
know.
then also emotionally, because
Yeah.
there's like that the psychology piece of breathing, right?
Hmm.
Like psychophysiological piece of breathing, meaning sometimes something will happen in life that will catch you off guard and
Hmm.
you'll have a response and the
Gasp.
diaphragm could lock up
Mm.
and then we could be in a state of freeze or in the the whole breath isn't actually being able to be accessed, so we are in a habit of short shallow breathing, which is sort of biohacking ourselves into stressful
Right.
states.
Yeah.
So depending on what's happening.
Right. So patterns can kind of get stuck in us,
Mhm.
um, like stuck in survival mode.
Mhm.
So it gets hard to, I don't want to say take a deep breath because, but to get the full range of the breath, if I'm only taking short, if I'm freaking out and I'm only, then what is hyperventilating in all this? Is that what that is? Is
I
just
mean,
short breaths that you can't really breathe, or
yeah, I
how
mean,
does?
essentially,
Yeah.
hyperventilating is not accessing your full capacity of breath.
Hmm.
It is short, shallow breathing. So then to say, take a deep breath, well, if I could, I would,
Hmm.
right? So how does that happen?
Is there
So,
nothing to be said about, yeah, it is unfair in most situations to coach someone, just take a deep breath, and
yeah,
because
yeah,
that's
yeah.
not, I would imagine, and I know that I've experienced before where I'm either helping someone find that rhythm or being helped to find a rhythm, you know, um, or being coached sort of to like, okay, can you try to breathe along with me or something like that?
Mm-hmm,
Is
mm-hmm.
how would you recommend, or what do you
I
say to
mean,
that sort of thing?
it does work.
Hmm.
It does work until you find that you're sitting with someone who you don't know their history with,
Hmm.
or that they have asthma and or something else. You know,
Sure.
I'm coming in through the lens of working with thousands of people.
Right.
So does am I meaning like don't tell your friend to hey breathe with me? Let's
Yeah.
just take a couple sighs out the mouth.
Hmm.
Absolutely not.
Right.
Like that does work.
Mhm.
But if you're someone who is like getting caught up and I don't breathe right, caught up in like, I can't, they're telling me to breathe. And every time I start practicing breathing, I'm triggered. I have to reach for my inhaler,
Mm,
right? Then that's what I'm speaking more to is
right. It's not as generalized and as maybe cut and dried as we like to make it seem.
right. Like
Right.
just like mindfulness with this whole like, well, you should just be more mindful. Well,
Right.
again, if I could, I would.
Mhm.
So it requires a little finesse and some teaching around
Mm,
like, hey, maybe you've been breathing with some dysfunctional patterns and you need to practice nasal breathing in states that aren't
right.
upregulated. And we practice some nasal breathing. Maybe we learn how to implement some other technique when you're regulated so that when you are experiencing moments of stress or tension or dysregulation,
Mhm.
you can then access breath.
Can you speak a little bit about how the ways that we breathe affect our nervous system?
Yeah. So I think I kind of said this thing, and I like, I often speak to like, what are our hacks or give us a
Mhm.
quick way.
Yeah.
So just like we can kind of hack our system into
Mhm.
regulation, we can hack ourselves into stressful states.
Which is kind of what you were just speaking about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we can find that because of habits that get set into place, that we're moving into quicker dysregulated states. Our
Mhm.
window of capacity is smaller because of malfunctioning in our
Mm,
breath.
right.
Now, that doesn't mean you learn pranayama technique in yoga classes, or you come to me and we work on breathing, or you go somewhere and you seek out, something with breath, and now trauma is dissolved.
Mhm.
Breathing isn't going to heal things of the past or of what's up, but also if we have access to breath, like functional
Mhm.
breathing patterns, it does set us into um, accessing states much easier.
So is there such a thing as a right way to breathe? Or is that just something else for us to overthink and
No, I mean, there's definitely a right way to breathe,
right.
in the way of function, like the most functional for biochemical, for
Sure.
what's best for your body, in the way of optimization, biomechanical, for sure. And that would be at the very simplest,
LSD.
light, soft, deep
Right.
nasal breathing.
Nasal breathing. Okay. So someone walks in and you're going to work with them on breathing. Is that what you're coaching them on? Is that or
Yes.
what does that process look like for you?
Okay, so if I'm working with someone and I'm seeing like, and they're coming in and saying, I sleep with a CPAP and I go into panic states a lot, and they're
Mhm.
right, they're having some shallow breathing. I mean, honestly, I refer them to someone who does
Mm,
airway restriction
sure.
and knows airway restriction before. So I'm not going to walk
And
someone into
is that a like a medical doctor or
like I have someone I work with who's a dentist who
okay.
specializes in airway restrictions.
Okay.
So
Yep.
I refer to her, but there are like myofunctional airway doctors, or
Mhm.
an ENT
Sure.
would be someone, because I don't want to do something like taping the mouth. There's a lot of mouth tape
Mhm.
stuff, and they have like adenoids and
Mhm.
polyps in their nose, right?
Yeah, all of a sudden they're suffocating and yeah,
Right.
like I'm not qualified to make that distinction, so
Right.
why
So
don't we make
that's
sure
not.
that you're safe first?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's where I just tend to
Sure.
people.
Yeah.
Um, but then I would practice very simply breathing in and out through the nose.
Mm,
And work with a little bit of, maybe eventually we work with a little bit of airway restriction or
mm,
airway hunger, intentional, meaning I
mm,
learn how to tolerate just a little bit of that air hunger.
mm,
So if I'm breathing just a little lighter, a little less, I'm not breathing as heavy. I've got this sense of like,
mhm. What does that do for us?
well, then we get into, there's a couple things that are
Mhm,
very interesting. Um, with airway hunger, again, tolerable airway hunger.
mhm,
What I noticed for me, more than the chemical side, more than that piece of like working with carbon dioxide offloading, is the states of my own psychology,
Mm.
meaning, ooh, I think I'm going to die.
Mm-mm.
And I'm starting to panic.
Mm.
And it's like, oh, wait, I have autonomy to open my mouth.
I can get a deeper breath if
Hmm.
I need to, right?
I can do that carbon dioxide offloading, which
Right.
usually is like,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't want to get to that state. This is
Mm.
like, again, I'm working with an adult in this
Sure.
situation.
Yeah.
That's one-on-one in understanding that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very different, again, Buteyko method
Okay.
practitioner, pranayama, yoga informed. But if I'm working in general population, and most of us are general population, um, it is just learning how to breathe in and out through the nose.
Mm. What happens if someone kind of tunes into their breath
Hmm.
and it actually feels uncomfortable or makes things worse for them for whatever reason? How do you approach that? So we're
Yeah.
getting into like the safety and the trauma informed way
Yeah. And
of doing this.
the reason why we're talking about breath and all of this stuff before we move into mindfulness
Mm-hmm.
is because of how mindfulness has been taught. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying, oh, this is actually a trauma inclusive way to move towards mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
So, what we know about dysfunctional patterns of breathing is there is a high correlation um, between trauma and dysfunctional breathing.
Mm.
There's a high correlation between poverty and dysfunctional breathing.
Right.
So in a
And
trauma
things
and
like asthma and
yes,
yeah, okay.
yeah, both in
Sure.
poverty and in trauma. Um, and n- let me be clear, poverty is also trauma, but
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about like lead poisoning in
Oh,
poverty. We're talking
right.
about other things in poverty, environmental, that
Right.
creates dysfunctional breathing. So if you are someone who goes to a practice, or you're like, oh, I want to work on this mindfulness thing, and they're telling me to track my breath, and it's actually triggering
Mm.
me out of states of regulation.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm not trying to like say we avoid all triggers, but what I'm
Sure.
saying is breath may not be in that moment
Yeah.
where you start.
And it's
You
sure not the end all be all, the key to it, which I think a lot of times it's sold that way.
It is sold that
Yeah.
way. It
Like
is
all you
sold.
got to do is, sit crisscross applesauce and, you know, start breathing, like breathe to this clicker or
Yeah.
whatever. And if that's not your thing, and then you're going to think, well, am I never going to get to a place where I'm regulated? And they might not have the right type of coaching or the right access to those tools to be helped and to
Hmm.
find what they need.
Yeah, and there's people who there are times in which we explore what that is. So
Mm.
I remember the first time I was practicing pranayama, that was really uncomfortable. A yoga breathing pattern where you had breath retention and you held the breath
Mm-hmm.
out at the bottom and you held your breath, and like the panic that set in. That state and how I had to work with myself, that's really beneficial,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's again the window of capacity.
Right.
So if you're like garnishing some beneficial awareness, and is so different if you can sit in that seat of self and be like, whoa, I can really feel myself panicking,
Mm.
and I actually have autonomy to take a breath and to drop that exercise and move on and try again. So different than if you're reaching for your inhaler, if you start to have a
Right.
panic attack,
Mm-hmm.
if it's triggering a memory. Those are very different things I'm speaking to.
Right. Is it that simple? Is this practice that, and not to simplify it, because a lot of people come at things from a lot of different ways, but let's say for myself, I don't struggle with asthma, right? So I'm not dealing with that. I didn't come from poverty, so I don't have some of those potential disruptors. I guess I'm just, maybe I'm looking too far into like what's the right way, what's the importance, what should I be mindful of when it comes to that? Do I need to just stop overthinking what this is, what breath work is.
Mm.
So I guess like, where do you go from there? So, we understand that things are not the same across the board, right? So we can't just make a one size fits all,
Hmm.
breathing equals healthy,
Right.
right?
Or
Or
mindfulness. Breathing
mindfulness,
equals an access to
right?
mindfulness or meditation.
So then where do we go from there? Like, if is the answer to, you have to find Laura or someone like Laura to help you work through what's the most helpful way for you to access mindful breathing, or like,
We start with letting your breath be a reminder that you're enough,
mm,
that you're breathing okay. In fact, we know you're breathing fine because you're alive.
mhm,
We start with letting the breath be a reminder that you can trust yourself,
mm.
that you can trust yourself to breathe in when it's time to breathe in, and you can trust yourself to breathe out when it's time to breathe out.
And we know this because you're still alive,
Hmm.
and because you can fall asleep and keep breathing.
Yeah.
um
So if we take that pressure off
mhm,
of like right and wrong and this should and this shouldn't, and we sort of go, okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and then just enter the lens of breathing with some curiosity.
mhm.
And in that way, breathe in through the nose and out through the nose, or breathe in through the nose when you're practicing meditation or mindfulness or needing to sort of take a beat, and out through the mouth.
What about when you are elevated, whether it's because you intended that, such as going to the gym and working out,
Mm.
or because something traumatic is happening? I
Oh,
mean, is either or.
okay,
um
so very
okay.
different. So if I'm working out, um, and I'm playing with breath training,
Mhm.
I might tape my mouth. In fact, I went to this yoga class. It was a hot yoga class
Mm.
of the same like 20 some poses. Great class. It was when COVID was just being lifted, so
Sure.
masks were still happening. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to get really curious. I'm going to
Mhm.
tape my mouth, which not like the pictures you see
Mhm.
of, duct tape across the mouth,
Yeah.
completely sealing
Right.
it. Don't do that
Right.
ever. No reason to.
Right.
I used just a little piece of the porous tape
Mhm.
that you put over your mouth. And then I had my mask on.
Mhm.
I went in and I took the class and I wear this Aura ring that tracks.
Mhm.
And afterwards, it asked if I took a nap.
Wow.
I was so mad because I was working my ass off.
Yeah.
It's a hard class. I was like
Yeah.
sweating. And they make you lay down and get back
Yeah.
up
Yeah.
in that style of class. I was like, nah, right? And
Yeah.
my ring was like, oh, did you take a nap? Because my breathing of in through the nose, out through the nose was so calm and regulated.
Because when you didn't bring in the ability for quick, massive breaths through your mouth, which is a lot of times what we'll default to.
When you're working out, you
Right.
start mouth breathing.
Right.
Hmm.
And
Carbon dioxide offloading is
right.
what's happening.
When that happens, everything elevates.
Well, yeah, your heart rate goes up, and we want our heart rate to go up
Yeah.
when we're
It's
working out. Like
healthy.
if I'm
Yeah.
running, but it is fun to practice doing sprints while nose breathing.
Mm.
It is fun.
Yeah. It doesn't sound fun to me at all, but yeah, I
But
get what you're
it is
saying.
fun
Yeah.
to practice. Like, can I lift heavy, get my heart rate up, and stay calm?
Mm.
It like knowing that my heart rate can go up and it's not a cue to mean I'm in a
Mm.
fight flight state,
Right.
right? I don't have to
Sure.
so can I work with that air hunger? Can I work with it as and it's fun
Hmm.
for me because
Sure.
it's just curious.
Yeah.
Not everyone would find that fun, but
Yeah.
those are breath training activities.
And you see, some athletes that will use like the air restrictor masks. Is
Mm-hmm.
that and this is not a
Yeah.
a fitness podcast, but like, is that to like strengthen lung and muscles and things like that as you're trying to breathe in and out? Or is that more to do with the restriction of the
No, it has
breath?
more to do with carbon dioxide.
Okay.
Um, and and it has to do with like most people who are doing that are like elevation training. Like you
Mm.
see a lot of players who are like, let's say a football player who lives in California is doing something like that because they've got a game in Colorado,
Ah,
so
gotcha.
you're working with like working with capacity there and growing your capacity, your
Mm.
lung capacity, but really also your carbon dioxide tolerance. And so we get into the biochemical parts
Right.
of breathing, which is all really interesting. And you can
Yeah.
follow that deep down a
Yeah.
rabbit hole.
There's a whole new path to go down with that. So
Mm-hmm.
let's switch then to if I. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
You
no,
still had. Yep.
let's switch to like more the biomechanical side of things. Like, how am I breathing
Mm-hmm.
in the realm of meditation or mindfulness or accessing a state?
Okay.
Like what you were saying originally.
Right. I was gonna see, and we don't have to go here, but you mentioned there's a huge difference in an elevated breathing because of exercise versus elevated breathing because of like trauma or problems and things like that.
Or
Do you,
panic.
yeah, do you want to get into that?
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely know the difference, and it's important to train ourselves. This is where I really love
Mm.
asana practice too,
Mm.
or yoga classes. They can train you to do this, not all of them do, but you learn how to stay in a steady flow of breathing, like Ujjayi breath. But also, Ujjayi breath should stay just in yoga practices, not in your everyday life. This is
What
where
is
there's
this?
Ujjayi breath is where you breathe in through the nose and out through the nose, but there's a restriction in the glottis. So it's
Mm.
like fogging up a mirror, like you go, but with your mouth closed. So the exhale is like,
Mm.
it can be very soothing, kind of addictive, enough that some yogis really can damage their throat and have. So that's people who
Wow.
get doing it all the time,
Uh-huh.
right? So everything within the context of where it needs to be
Mm.
practiced. So it can be a soothing, regulating, down regulating breath because it is so calm. But you're doing like this hard kick ass vinyasa class where you're working really hard and your
Mm-hmm.
heart rate's going up and the breath is staying calm.
Mm.
So we're starting to learn that just because my heart rate is elevated doesn't mean I need to
Right.
make meaning of it like this is panic
Mm-hmm.
or I need to like do something about it.
Changing the way your brain associates one thing with the other.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Mm.
That is such a cool part of
Yeah.
learning that you can breathe and have a elevated heart rate.
Yeah. It reminds me of, this is just because I have some experience in this world, but it reminds me of when I first started getting tattooed, my tattoo artist would say, remember to breathe.
Mm.
Like, because for some reason, and a lot of times when we're experiencing pain or when we're experiencing other things, we'll kind of hold it, and just kind of forget that maybe I breathe it.
You want to know something cool about that?
Please.
Okay, so when we breathe in, so go ahead and breathe in and now hold. Can you feel the abdominal pressure that gets the bearing down,
Yeah.
which creates stability and
Mm-hmm.
creates tolerance to the tattoo, right?
Right.
Because we're like bearing.
Right.
Yeah. So it's
Hmm.
really cool that we do this automatically. We
Yeah.
go, oh, I'm
It's one
gonna
of the many things about our bodies that will naturally protect us
I
and
love
keep
it.
us alive, right?
Yeah. So that
Yeah.
abdominal pressure that gets built to create stability, we're holding our breath. It's creating like structures so we
Mm-hmm.
can put up with the thing that's happening. What they're saying, because it's not the exhale people in that scenario
Mm-hmm.
that they're holding at, it's the inhale and holding.
Sure.
It's not the
Is
exhale.
there anything that we would exhale and hold?
Not
Not
I
really.
can think
Yeah,
of.
me neither.
Not typically. It's
No.
usually at the top of the inhale that we find ourselves holding our breath. People
Mm-hmm.
hold their breath at the top of the
Mm.
or in a challenge, like if they're working on something, even like if you're like doing something, a tool, like
Yes.
a project,
Well,
people will hold.
I
Yeah.
even just thought about like painting or something. Like if you're trying to pull like a nice smooth line, I don't want to be breathing because my body moves and I'm all fluid and everything.
Yeah.
I don't want to be doing. I want to,
Yeah.
and then I'll breathe out afterwards. So,
I know. And
yeah,
so it's really in that way intuitive to
yeah.
like that abdominal pressure that gets
Mhm.
created. And then we're like in the biochemical side, biophysical side of then the psycho. So, it's like it's all
Yeah,
happening.
yeah,
And this is
absolutely.
the beauty of breathing
Right.
in the way. And we haven't even dived into the understanding of breath of spirit. We haven't even gone into the spiritual aspect of breathing.
Mm.
Um, and
Do
I
you
get.
want to?
Well, there's one thing that I think
Yeah,
that's really cool that there's just one thing that
sure.
has been said, and I say it is that the first thing we do is take a breath, right? When we're born.
Mhm.
And the last thing we do before we die, take a breath.
Mhm.
So somewhere between that, and many teachers have said, a life is a series of
Breath.
breaths.
Right.
So how many, and it's also said often if we've got 100 breaths in our lives, then slow your breath down,
Mm.
let it
Mm.
stretch,
Mhm.
right? So there is this other piece of breathing that has to the living experience, to being alive.
Mm.
That is sacred and beautiful and spiritual and can be made. And it's in all the wisdom texts.
Right.
It's used as an understanding of spirit.
Right.
If you're experiencing moments of like a moment of stress, or you're experiencing something in the way of like you flipped your lid,
Mhm.
then, and it's acute, like happening right now, then slow exhales, or even some people will sigh, and that's kind of intuitive of like,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Or a
Mm.
like you're blowing a dandelion, kind of stretch the exhale out.
Right.
It's helpful if we practice it when we're not in those
Just like
states.
anything else, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you practice it when you're not in the heightened state so that you can hopefully grasp at least a part of it when you are in
Yeah.
that height, and that you're more likely to go into like more of a muscle memory type of
Yeah.
response.
You can access it then.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you've never practiced it, it's going to be harder to access it.
Mm-hmm.
So someone who might be listening who's curious but doesn't necessarily connect with maybe going to yoga classes to do
Yeah.
this, do you kind of have a simple, maybe not intimidating breath practice that somebody could do that maybe you can walk us through it, if you're open to guiding us through, maybe a short sort of breath exercise or check-in or something like that that people can use?
Yeah, I think the greatest practice with breathing is compassionate awareness that you are, right? So wherever you are, just notice that you're breathing. And wherever that is, that you sense it, if it's in the nose or the throat or the chest, belly, wherever it is that you can sense breathing. And then just remind yourself that however you're breathing is enough. And that you are enough. And then just by bringing your awareness to the breath like that, you might notice that the awareness itself slows the breath down. That's a quick, fast, easy way to access it.
The traveler hadn't moved much, but something had shifted. He'd noticed his breath. The rhythm of the boat, the fish breathing beneath him. He was part of it all. The sea, the stillness, the strangeness of being alive. Breathing in, breathing out. Still here, and for today, that was enough.